programming basics. This is great. I'm cooking along. Why I became a website programmer. In the advent of the 21st century, about 2004, I wanted to make a website to sell a book that I self-published. Do you want to see it? May as well. What the hell is wrong with you? It's not what you think. Does this still have the picture? No picture available. $45. It is not $45. In no way is it $45. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. So I wrote this book, Footnotes of a Burnt Out, Pissed Off 10-Year Restaurant Worker, because before I did any of this computer programming stuff, I was in restaurants and bartended and stuff, and I wrote this book, and I needed a website to sell the book, and so I started learning so that I could sell the book online. I learned basic principles as a kid. I wrote programs in BASIC, but nobody uses BASIC anymore that I'm aware of. Maybe they do. But I did learn that you could tell a computer to do something, and it probably will, just like you told it to. I borrowed an HTML book from a friend and started messing around, and then I kept wondering, I kept getting curious, how do they do a counter? Yeah, how do they change a picture dynamically without reloading the page? You know, these questions I had, I looked up in Google or in a book and figured it out, and I implore you to do the same. You have to be curious and find projects or solutions that you want to do yourself. I write my own web applications that cover a lot of different bases all at once. So, you know, ideas like that are good for you to have if you're learning how to do programming, so that you can write your own programs to help you out in life and do things. Why I chose the languages I chose. Back then, I found that the main choices that you had were either .NET or ASP, but mostly .NET and PHP. And I knew that looking through job listings, .NET paid more than PHP, but you needed to spend money back then to get started with .NET. It's not like that anymore. You can learn .NET for free and play around with Visual Basic, but back then you had to pay for a license, and I didn't want to do that. At the time, I wasn't even sure whether or not I'd do this as a job, so I started with PHP. 3PP is something that I say when I'm talking about third-party programming. Anything third-party, normally, not always, and I know that I'm going to get some static for this, but sometimes if it's a small package, usually something that's been around for a long time, that's great. Use it. If it's big and you like it and it works for you, great. Use it. I'm not a fan of 3PP, especially the larger things, larger programs, and I'm going to try not to bag on a lot of them, but I have seen them fail time and time and time again. And I know that their purpose is for rapid application deployment, development, rapid application development, RAD, another acronym, so that you can start up, whip up a program online real quick and see if you get ROI before you dump a bunch of money into it. The only problem is it costs a lot of money to get third-party programming up and running, just like it does writing it from scratch. It just takes less time. And I have seen it. If you write stuff from scratch, it works better, especially for you or for whatever purpose you're trying to do, or the business you work for is trying to do. So I think that's all I'm really going to say about that. Right now, I'm sure I'll say more about it later because I really don't like third-party programming. Okay, goodbye, naughty by nature. All right, so let's talk about frameworks and libraries and 3PP and third-party programming. I do use some third-party programming because it is helpful, but you have to be careful what you use. Sometimes some things are so large that they bloat your application and it takes longer to make your application work, or it actually slows down your application. Sometimes they're very easy and you can go and look at the source code. Sometimes they're very complex and it would take you a lot more time to go through all of their source code than it would just to write something to help you out, or some sort of helper application or middleware, or whatever you need to write. Um, this is super important here. Is no matter what framework you use or library you use, you still need to know the underlying technology. Um, I've been a part of some of the hiring processes where we've had to turn away some pretty decent candidates because a lot of our source code is still in regular PHP and vanilla JavaScript, and they only know frameworks. They only know React, or they only know Vue or Laravel, and they don't know what's underneath it. So if we put them in our regular code base, they'd be lost. So it's really important that you learn the base technologies, you learn the languages, and then you can add on more frameworks and become more viable. But if you if you learn that Vue.js will help you make a lot of JavaScript modules quicker, and reusable modules you could put on pages all over the place with just a couple lines of code, that's great. But if you don't know the JavaScript that makes them work, then you might be putting yourself at a disadvantage. um, I said I wasn't going to bag on too many programs, but I'm going to talk about I'm going to lightly talk about a program called Magento. Magento is an open source e-commerce software, which means you can go and look at the source code. You can go and see all of the code that it takes to run. And we used it. I used it before at a previous job, and we had a lot of customizations to it. It did not work the greatest for us. It may work great for you if you decide to go with something like this. It may not. It is another one of those things, though. If you don't know the PHP that makes it work, then you might, and it fails, you might just be stuck. You might be totally stuck. And then you can go to like Magento, GitHub. It's probably this one. So you can go in here if you'd like and look at all of their source code, app, mid analytics, controllers. You can look at their controllers and all of their source code. You have access to everything that you would download. You could even download it straight from GitHub and get it to work. But the chances that you're going to go through the 20,000 files that make this up is probably not very good. You obviously don't need to, if you used a program like this, you don't need to go through all of their source code. But I do bring that up because, in particular, Magento allows you to download and install additional software packages or plugins, and they're not always vetted properly. And what happened with us is we installed a Magento plugin that helped with our checkout process, and without knowing it, it was sending credit card numbers, customer credit card numbers, doing a curl request, which we'll talk about that later, but it was sending the credit card information straight to Chechnya. It's one of those things that even with those plugins, you can't just blindly, you cannot blindly accept or trust software that's out there. And that's another reason why I'm such a big fan of writing stuff yourself. It's, it's not going to do anything you are not planning because you wrote it. Oh, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting to that tab. Sorry if you read that. Jumping ahead. Cloud computing. There is a debate of whether or not you call it someone else's computer. I guess this hurts a lot of feelings, and you can tell by Googling it. And these people here, is the cloud just someone else's computer? The answer should be a resounding no. So you can stop saying the cloud's someone else's computer, because it's not. And I think I opened this and this person's saying, well, it kind of is because it's not your computer and you don't have control over the environment. And if you get cloud computing on a server that is amongst many other servers that have valuable information, if somebody is successful in hacking that server, they're going to get your information too. And technically, the server space that you're going to put together is in cloud computing for all intents and purposes. But at the same time, you should keep in mind that the cloud or your internet server is not your computer unless you have it sitting in here. But I have a server that sits in the closet and it's just an old Windows computer, and I put Linux on it, and we'll talk about that too in another video. And that is my computer, so I know that there's nothing in there, and I can watch the logs and make sure nobody breaks into it. And if somebody does break into it, I can mitigate it. Basically, keep a mind of security and where computers physically are and how close they are server-wise, machine-wise to more important information and the probabilities of a server being hacked. All these things are very important to keep in mind. I'm all done with Windows. I'll probably get a few smaller things in these videos dealing with Windows, but for the most part, I work on a Mac, and everything I'm going to show you is going to be on Linux and running on Linux servers. Many reasons, many personal reasons behind that for me. I have had a lot of difficulties using Windows, and I've had a lot less difficulties with Mac. So I don't want to get into a debate or anything, because I know a lot of people that love Windows more than life. I've just had a lot of problems with them, so gonna get in trouble for that, probably. All right. Architecture. Let's talk about some architecture. Look before you leap and plan. That isn't, there should be look before you leap, ... and plan. Maybe a comma will do better. Look before you leap and plan. I'm not going to get into agile methodologies and different ways to plan for your working, but I do think it's important to make sure that you do have a plan together. If you want to make a web application, make sure you at least jot down some notes from A to B, where you're going to start and what your ending is. Not going to get too deep into planning with these videos unless somebody asks for it, but for the most part, there's two ways you can do it. You can plan or you can not plan. And if you don't plan, you'll be building as you go, and you'll get a lot of scope creep or features. They're like, oh, I forgot about that. I need that in there. And then that adds to the time. And being a developer, you have to keep in mind how long things take. And you normally have to say, okay, well, this is going to take me 3 weeks to do. And, obviously starting off, you're not going to be able to judge how long things take, but eventually you will. And it's important to be able to plan and know how long things are going to take. Yes, my note said I do this. I still start small projects, and they easily spiral into monsters that suck all of my time away. And with my OCD, I'm not diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I have it. I have a hard time giving up on a project. Boy, do I. All right. There are a lot of acronyms. There is alphabet soup full of acronyms in computer programming when dealing with architecture and the language names and all kinds of stuff. Just acronyms all over the place. I've already gone through a few of them, and I'm going to go through a lot more. Solid is, I never remember exactly what it is. Solid programming methodology. technology. And you can read into this if you want. There's single responsibility principle where one method or one class is for one thing, meaning a class should only have one job. Open closed principal objects or entities should be open for an extension but closed for modification. I'm not even going to go through all these because I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. Liskov. I guess I know how to pronounce it. That's not too hard. So you can look that up on your own. There's a much easier one. The dry. Don't repeat yourself. Just love that one. So if you got a chunk of code or you've got a function, right, that does something, then you have that function and you should be able to call it from wherever you want to call it so that you don't have to write the same chunk of code over and over and over and over again. We'll get more into that, but keep this one in mind because this one I'm going to use. Don't repeat yourself. This is the one that I use for myself all the time is keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. Actually, it's not even a programming acronym. I've just extrapolated into programming because I like to keep things simple and I am stupid. Moving on. Composer. This is what I was going to talk about before. I don't remember what color I have here. Composer is a package manager for PHP that will load in things, and we will be using some of it because I'm not totally against, I don't want to write everything from scratch. But the things that I use with Composer are like, Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework, that you can get via Composer, or PHP Mailer is another one that I use, which is third-party PHP library, provides simple way to send emails. It does save a lot of time, and it's been around for freaking ever. So I'm pretty sure that there's not going to be extra stuff in there that I don't want. What's another one? So use FPDF. FPDF is a wonderful library, which you don't even need Composer for these either. You can go to the GitHub and just get the source code yourself and plop it on the server, which, might be just as easy. But FPDF is used to generate PDFs, and it is awesome. But be careful what you install. I have experienced a situation where someone installed a library off of Composer and it created a Bitcoin miner and it replicated all over the server. So you could find them and delete them. It would just make new ones in different locations, and it was a nightmare. So be really careful what you install. There's people out there that suck all day. They suck all day. Docker. Docker is one of a few popular open source container applications where you can have your entire server and all of your languages and database and everything right in your local computer, like right in your laptop. I don't care for I don't care for these. I just said this. So there you go. Virtual servers, local computer, work offline. These are some of the reasons I don't like them. Number one, you can work all day on getting your Docker container to be exactly like the production server, but you will not be notified of environment changes. So if the production server changes, they're not going to call you up and say, hey, you got to go make your Docker match. So that's a lot of extra work to make sure that your environment is the same as the production server. So that's one reason I just connect to the server, do my work on the server, and run my work on the server, and it's all on the server. That seems like a path of least resistance. After environment changes or other things, I've seen developers lose days reconfiguring and rebuilding instead of the technical deficit, like the work that we are supposed to be working on, the programming and the features and fixing bugs. And I've seen developers lose all that time because they're busy making their Docker work. So that's a bit of a peeve. You need copies of the database, possibly including production, which causes security issues. Docker has its own database engine, so it needs its own database so that you can work offline. And you can, in most environments, you've got a development database, and that's great. It's usually smaller. You can download it and you're done. But in a lot of regular production environments, you need a copy of the production database to do large scale testing with a large database. And if you copy the main production database, that could be your customer sensitive data, and you don't want an extra copy of that floating around on somebody's laptop. It just causes security issues. So that's how I feel about Docker, and I'm sorry to anyone who loves it. Let's talk about strings just a little bit. So this is the very first step into programming is when you look at code. We've all seen what code looks like, I hope. So let's open this. Let's look at some of this. This is what makes my little ba-ba-da-ba-da work. And you can see that there's variable names in here. And obviously, I'm not going to get too deep right away, but this is one of the projects, is making this whiteboard thing. There you go. Let's start this thing. Variable strings are written in different ways. Sometimes they mean different things. Lowercase and uppercase. I'm sure you're aware of both of those things. A lowercase example would be the canvas one that I was just looking at. Or controls is lowercase. It's self-explanatory. Uppercase, PHP constants. Right here. So like, for instance, this is actually not the best example. So let's do this. PHP R. Say define Bob is your uncle, and then echo Bob. No dollar sign. We'll get into that later. And you can see that it replaced Bob with is your uncle in that one line. Super neat. Is your uncle, right? So that would be an example of what an uppercase string would be in PHP in that context. Normally, variables in PHP start with a dollar sign. We're going to get into that. I'm just talking about case, and I included those because they do exist. Camel case is what I normally use for JavaScript and PHP. It's usually my go-to is camel case. There are a couple instances that camel case does not work, which, for instance, putting an ID tag and using that as a data attribute in JavaScript. We'll get into that later, but there's an instance where camel case will not work. Studley case is camel case except for the first letter is uppercase instead of lowercase. I've seen this more often defining classes or PHP objects. We'll get into that later, but it's good to know. Studley case is the name of that. Snake case is like a snake, and the words are separated by underscore. I've seen this a lot more in older code, but I know that people still use it. And kebab case, which is a lot like snake case, except it's got the dash instead of the underscore, and it looks like a delicious shish kebab of words. And that is that for that video. That's easy peasy. How do I stop it? Here you go. All right. Until the next video. Goodbye. Oh, good. That somehow locked up. See? The grass isn't always greener. So this is the grass is dead everywhere. That's the problem. The grass is dead everywhere. Oh, howdy, partner. I'm changing my channel for a little while, and here's what it's going to be about. I've been a computer programmer for almost 20 years. It's been that long. Oh, God help me. I've had a lot of friends ask me how to code, so I'm putting these videos together in hopes to teach them, and you. I'm starting with about 60 videos, and you can see them all at blog.freddysthunder.com/programming. And I will have all of the videos listed here, and this is probably subject to change, but these are the first 61 that I'm planning. And for the very few of you subscribers I do already have, I will still be making videos about the Beast, and I'll still be doing music and skits and stuff. So be sure to like, subscribe, and leave some comments or some questions. I'll answer them, maybe.
Ha ha ha, hee hee ha, ho ha 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 ha.